Well, welcome to SPED Homeschool Conversations. Thank you for joining us on our Facebook Live broadcast. And for those of you who are joining us via our recorded session, either on Facebook, YouTube, or on our podcast. Tonight, our special guests are Matthew and Alesia Blackwood, the creators of an online math program called Unlock Math. Welcome, Matthew and Alesia.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you here tonight, and I just want to thank you for joining us and agreeing to talk tonight about just math and special needs and struggling learners. I know we get a lot of questions about math. Just how do I do this? As you know, parents just kind of really struggle with that, and I'm just glad that you're here, that you can have so much insight to share, and that's kind of what we're just going to be talking about tonight. So thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be here.
Yeah, definitely. So I just thought I would start the story with you, Alesia, since you were homeschooled yourself. And that's got to give you an interesting perspective now coming in as a homeschooler and providing instruction for homeschool parents. But then you followed your passion to be a teacher. And you taught in the public schools, and you also taught children who had special learning needs outside of the traditional classroom in more of a special ed classroom. So can you take us through that process and just kind of where it led you and maybe some of the insight and how it got you to, I guess, where you are right now?
Sure, yeah. Well, it is kind of interesting that I was homeschooled. I started in 4th grade. I think we went 2 weeks in, and my mom pulled us, myself and my sister and my brother. Mm-hmm. And I was homeschooled the longest for 5 years. And I don't know why, but I just always knew I was going to be a teacher. And except for a brief 3-year period where I'd considered engineering because of my love for math. Mm-hmm. At that time, it was pretty stressful, actually, because the school board was very against it. Mm-hmm. There was very few people that actually did it, and so we were constantly being put through these tests, and we'd have to go and meet with the superintendent, and he would tests that the classroom kids did not go through. So that was always very stressful because you never knew what was going to happen, and they made it, he was very stern. So very different from how it is today, where there's a lot more support, there's a lot more people involved in it, and it's not just those weirdos, because that's how it was at that time. You must be weird if you're homeschooling.
Exactly.
I'm sure I am a little weird, but yeah, it was a very stressful time, but it was also a really good time for me. At that time, there really was not curriculum to choose from. My mom, she got used books that she could find, things that they had from the classroom that they just, thrown away, or and we eventually did, we did actually use a Becca back in the day. Of course, math was my favorite even then. I really just like doing math questions just for the fun of it. I still to this day will, I just find it relaxing, which, my students always thought was nuts. But
I do too.
But it was, after 5 years, I knew that I wanted to go on to university and I wanted to be a teacher. And my mom always thought I'd be a kindergarten teacher. And the older I got, the more I realized that I really did not want to do really young kids because they're cute and everything, but I wanted to be able to have conversations with my students. And there was way too many hormones raging in that middle school age, so it takes a special person that teaches middle school grades. So I went back to high school because at that time in Canada, it was exceptionally difficult to get your diploma and then go on to university. And so we made the decision for us to go back to high school or go back to public education. And so I did that. And of course, everybody's like, wondering how you're going to adjust and, are you going to be socialized or are you just going to be, I was always a very social person, so I really had no troubles. And I wasn't behind behind the kids, and there's, the class. And it was kind of funny because through high school, with the exception of there's a few years there where I had really considered engineering, and I had this one teacher that actually I had several math teachers that I loved, and my physics teacher who I loved. And I used to talk to him about my goals and stuff, and I told him that I was thinking about engineering. And finally, when it came down to the decision making, he's like, Alesia, I really don't think that you'd enjoy engineering. And he's like, it's not, I don't think your personality would really enjoy that. But I really think you should think about teaching. And it was right around the same time I had 2 other math teachers because I took every math, every science, every English that I possibly could because I didn't want to close any doors. And all of them said around the same time, have you ever thought about teaching? And when I was in high school, they had this class that was called peer tutoring, and you got to choose what class you wanted to work with. And so I had chosen for 2 semesters that I did it, I chose to work in a special needs. And these particular classes were self-contained, so they were pretty severe cases. But this one particular student that I worked with, he lived in a foster home. He had some pretty specific needs, and he had a temper, he had anger issues, but he didn't have really a lot of things that were his own. And so I worked with him one-on-one, and really it was we worked through some math and just different exercises to try and help him to advance as much as he possibly could. Right. And he wasn't going to be able to live on his own, so be self-sufficient, but it was to try and give him as much independence and just connection really with people. And so when I finished off my time with him, I remember I had given him some little going away present kind of thing, and the teacher had told me that later how much that had meant to him because he didn't have much of his own things, and so that was really special to him. And so that was kind of like the start of for me, it was being able to make such a difference with this child who had all of these struggles, but he looked forward to his time with me. So that was like really encouraging because like I felt like I was actually doing something that mattered, and it made a difference to this student. And so that really is what started it off. And then when it came time to choose what I was going to do in university, then I decided that of course I was going to do math, and then I did computer science as well for my Bachelor of Education. And those are my 2 teachables. So I went off to my first teaching job, which was, it's very eye-opening when it's your first job and you're teaching. And I had a very large class of 36 kids to start off with, which was kids who struggled in math, and it was called, I think it was like grade 12 business math. And so that was an experience in and of itself, was teaching these kids that struggled. And it was really, to try and get them to be able to apply some of these math skills to their everyday life when they left school. It wasn't algebra, it wasn't geometry, it was, balancing a checkbook, accounting, that type of thing, really useful math, for them. And then I was asked to teach a special needs class, and it was math. And it was a very small class. I believe it was 15 students, but I had 2 educational assistants. And I absolutely adored these students. They were my favorite. And again, it felt like I was making a difference in their life to, not just because of the math, but because it was connecting to them in a way that, it was just different from the regular classroom. And one student that I had, he told me that I broke his heart the day that I got married, because he told me he was in love with me. I was his first love. And and he was just a jokester, and he was a sweet kid. But these kids just really, these particular students, they just really touched me in a way that that I hadn't had before, and I felt again like I was making a real difference in their life, even though it wasn't the kind of math that, it wasn't the algebra 2, it wasn't, which is, I love to teach algebra 2, it's one of my favorite things, but it was just it was trying to help these kids to understand, whether they were really getting a good deal, whether they were, whether the sale was worth it, that type of thing, and just help them have some independence moving forward. And it was just a lot of fun. We were able to do hands-on type of things more so than would normally have the time. I got to slow down and think about what to teach them, and actually, not be so stressed about, you have to get to this, this, and this, because it was like, okay, we really want them to get this. So how can we make it real to them? What kind of, hands-on activities can we do with them? And so that's that. Before I met Matthew, that was actually my plan, was to move into the special education realm of teaching. And but then I moved to Georgia and things changed. So it was kind of, it's kind of interesting, because the experiences that I had in those classes, and it applies to the regular classroom. When I started what I'm doing now, my goal was just, there are kids that struggle, and they're being taught too much all at once, and anybody who struggled, they don't absorb it well. And so that kind of formed the way that I decided that I wanted to move forward in how I would teach it. And there was so many, I came across so many strugglers, and I just really wanted to be able to help them. And so and I was like, well, I'm designing this, so I'm going to finally teach it the way I want to teach it.
Right.
And I want to try and make it interesting, make it fun, make it, at the very least, more enjoyable than it had been before. And I always tell parents, well, I can't make them love math necessarily, but hopefully they'll hate it just a little bit less, and I'll take that as a win.
I love that. I think we have to look at all subjects that way. You can't make anybody love anything, but yes, the more you can do to make them hate it less. I love that you said that, you make it fun and enjoyable. And I think when we do make things more fun and enjoyable, we tend to have a better attitude about it. And it may not be that we love it, but at least we approach it, I guess, a little more easily.
Definitely.
Than if it's, we just got to get this done every day. So, and you talked about independence. I think that's one thing that we often forget, that's the thing that we're pushing for, is whatever, inkling of independence that you can give a child is success. And, like you said, the one boy you worked with in the classroom, that, he might not have progressed very far, but you gave him enough to be a little more independent. And that, as a teacher, makes you feel good. And as a child, as a student, that encourages them to keep going.
Exactly. Yes. And I think that's the thing that just it makes it feel worthwhile. The stress, or the struggle, or the time you put in, it really does. Just all you need is just a little bit. That's the thing with any student, I think, in general, but especially students that struggle or have particular needs. I feel like it doesn't take much.
Little
wins.
Exactly.
Because personally, that for me, I mean, sometimes that's all I need. I just need a little something to make it feel like, okay, all right, I can keep moving forward. I understood this, or I helped this student with this, or whatever it might be, it really does make such a huge difference. And I love that.
Yeah, exactly. It's, I think we focus too much on the long term instead of just the short little victories. The everyday celebrations that we need to have. We so often look at a full year's worth of curriculum and go, we just got to get this done. When this is done, this is success. And that's not true. It's when we get one problem right, that's success.
Right. When you only focus on the destination, you miss the joy of the journey, and it's unfortunate. But I think we all have that tendency and have to fight against that. Especially, I think in homeschooling, it's an even bigger pressure because you've got people that are constantly wanting to judge you or
test your kids in public.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that makes it hard, and especially for parents who have children who struggle. I mean, you get nervous when people start questioning because, the progress that they're making, but it doesn't look like a lot of progress to people on the outside. And
people get so hung up on where your child should be,
grade level,
what grade are they in? And my kid they'd freeze up almost. They wouldn't know how to answer it because we just didn't talk like that. And so I say, well, they're in blah, 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 and people are fine. And the thing I find interesting is that when people find out I'm a teacher, then it's like it's okay that I homeschool. Oh, okay, and that drives me crazy because
I know
what mother in general that homeschools isn't going to do everything she can to teach that child. I know from teaching in the classroom that so much of your time is definitely not on teaching. It's on classroom management. It's on dealing with the behavior. It's all of this stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with what you're trying to teach them. And, and that's the thing that I think that people don't understand. And a lot of time when people start homeschooling or, they think they have to recreate that time that has to be, you have to spend this much time. It's like, you know what? The time that they actually learn in school is so much less than you think.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know. You can just keep telling parents that over and over again, and eventually it'll sink in, especially the longer they've homeschooled.
Exactly. Well, and I have parents who they have called me and okay, so here's where we're at, whether it's pre-algebra or whatever, and they're really slow. They're understanding it, but it's taking a long time, and I'm worried they're going to get behind. And I said, look, here's the thing. First of all, we need to take a deep breath, and it's going to be okay. Because I said, if they don't get this, if you push them through this and they don't understand it because you're pushing them too fast, I said, then they're not going to be able to do anything past this because it's the foundation. And obviously I'm speaking specifically about math, but I think it's true with anything. Any topic you want to learn, you have to learn the foundation first and then grow from that. And if they don't learn the foundation, then, you're just causing a lot of stress and problems, in the future that doesn't need to be there.
I think another thing that parents, one thing that some homeschool parents don't realize is they can adapt any curriculum to fit their child. I remember a phone call I had with a parent in January, and she was planning to switch to our math curriculum, but I asked her what was not working about the one she was currently using, because it's halfway through the year, and sometimes it's a good idea to switch, and sometimes it's not. But I just wanted to find out what was the reason. And she was using Saxon, which is very thorough, but it can be a lot for some kids. And that was the situation. It was just too many questions in a day. And I told her, I said, you're the boss.
Right, exactly.
You have to give them every single question in Saxon every day. You can adapt that to fit your needs and make it through the year.
So that's what she did.
Right. I think I remember the first year that I started the curriculum that I taught my kids. We started 16 years ago, but the lady who wrote it, that was the first thing she said is, you don't need to do everything that I put in this book, because it was a unit study, and it was like, oh, good, because my kids won't sing a song, and so that goes out the window. And it was that permission to say, okay, it's not all required. Yes, you need to learn the lesson, but there's a certain amount of application once a child gets it. And, especially with math, I know you know this too, is, being with that child when they're doing each question to make sure that it's right or wrong, or, at least checking it before they go on to the next one so they don't repeat that mistake, 10 times, and now they've embedded it and learned it the wrong way.
Right.
So sometimes less is better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the thing is, like, I always encourage kids to find their own mistakes. I said, because there's a learning process that goes on through that. And even my younger son, he will read a question and then it's like, what is this saying? I was like, he's like, I don't know how to figure it out. And I'll say, maybe you just need to come back to it later. You need to think about this. And then so sometimes he'll just close the book up. He'll go away. He'll come back to it later and he go, oh, Mommy, I don't even know why I was having so much trouble with this. And, and he'll have figured it out. And then he feels, he feels a sense of accomplishment, and he actually remembers what it is he did, that he went through it. And so, I find that pretty neat to see that process happening. Well,
that's a life skill. I mean, we all have to learn how to walk away from things, and, we can't force information out of ourselves. It's like the writing process too. When you're trying to write, you can't force yourself to always come up with that. And so to teach a young child that is so beneficial to their life, instead of sitting there and racking their brain and trying to get the right answer immediately. I think that's one of the benefits of homeschooling is our kids do have that freedom. They're not in a classroom where the person who raises their hand fastest is the best. Yes. Sometimes processing brings about the best answer anyways.
Well, we have poetry memorization that we do, and when I have them do it to me, recite it to me, my same son, he's very kinesthetic, and he will do laps around the couch, around and around and around while he's reciting his poems. It's just he has to be moving, and I don't know of any classroom that would be okay with that.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Since the get-go, when we started math with him, and we don't really do anything formal in math till they're about 7, but he couldn't sit down for it. I would have to ask him the questions verbally, and because he couldn't sit down, he had to have something in his hands.
If he had putty in his hands, that really helped him to be able to focus more, because otherwise he's just antsy. And so, our oldest, you just tell him, like, listen, you have to sit down and do it because you do, and he would do it. Whereas, so you think, yay, I've got it figured out. And that, this parenting thing, homeschooling thing, it's all good. And then comes the next one, it's not quite the same. And it's like, oh, well, maybe I don't have it quite figured out.
Exactly.
So different, as we know.
Yep. Yeah, I had my hardest two first. So I always said if I would have had my daughter before my boys, I would have thought everybody that struggled with homeschooling was crazy. But she's just really easy, and thank goodness. She's the only one I'm left teaching. But that's, it's interesting is that, math is such an abstract concept, and waiting is not a bad thing, because I think you would definitely say that there's a point where kids cannot understand math just based on their life experiences. Right. And so pushing it.
The funny thing is, I was talking to a professor from where I went to university when I was developing this, and I was just fascinated by her research, and I wanted to hear more about it. So I asked her if she could see me so she could tell me. And what she studied, and she's in psychology, but she studied how children learn math. And one of the things she said was that they've discovered that the kids' brains go through this phase.
Developmental phase.
Developmental phase. In grade 5 and grade 11, and it affects their math ability. And it made so much sense to me from being an Algebra 2 teacher, which is grade 11. It was like all of a sudden their brains just like exploded or something, and they couldn't remember nothing they did before they got to me. So we had to kind of, rewire things and whatever, but it was just interesting to find out that 5th grade and 11th grade, age 10 and 16, was this brain going through this phase that made it a little more challenging in some cases for kids moving forward.
And of course, as we know, those are averages. So where your child hits that phase may not be right on the dot.
Right.
They'll hit it.
Yeah. So it's interesting how the brain is, and I like we said, we don't do formal until at least they're 7. And
but we speak math from birth.
Right. Anything with grouping and adding and numbers and when you're cooking and that type of thing. So it's not something that we talk about it when we sit down here. It's something that we incorporate into just like language. When kids are learning, you speak to them all the time. Well, it's the same with math. They have to hear the language in order to understand it when it comes time to actually apply these different terms and that sort of thing.
Right. Just even add, the word add or subtract or those types of concepts. So that makes a lot of sense. I guess I've never heard anybody say that, to use that language. I talk about it in character development with kids, but it's so important that that child relates it to life experiences and everyday life, because when you try to compartmentalize it, I think that's when we run into the most problems.
Yes, absolutely. Kids, the biggest question, of course, is always, well, how does this apply to me in life? I'm going to go into psychology, and it's not always about the algebra itself. It's about the process. It's about the developing those connections in your brain, and making the logical decisions and developing that. You can't develop it. It's like a muscle, and because kids just don't see how it relates to their life and why they should do this if they hate it. So I've had conversations with students about that, and so I think if it's the language and pointing things out and incorporating shapes and numbers and fractions just in general, then it's kind of becomes commonplace to hear this. And when it comes time to bring the abstract in, then it's not as much of a stretch for kids to be able to make those connections that they need to make.
That's a really good point. Yeah. So you have some stories to share of families that have had struggling learners that have come to you that you wanted to share with us. So I thought I would just ask you to share maybe one or two, and also to let our viewers know if you have questions for Alyssa and Matthew, just about maybe your child that you'd like them to answer, or just maybe in teaching math, definitely put those in the feed, and we'll put them up on the screen as they come in. Why don't you share with us a story or two about what you've been through with some other parents. And, I'm sure that our families will be able to relate, because a lot of them are intermixed. I know I remember hearing the same questions over and over again as a special needs consultant. And we're not alone, definitely, when our kids struggle.
Right, exactly.
Well, we've designed our curriculum, or I should say, Alesia has designed our curriculum to be as hands-off for parents as possible. But depending on the special needs of the child, there are many that cannot be parents hands off. You've got to sit down with a child, and I'm thinking of one in particular. And we actually met the mom this year at a homeschool convention in Cincinnati, and she came up and gave us both a big hug, and that was a little bit of a surprise. But we felt like we didn't do as much for her as we wanted to. But we did learn from her, because we tried to support her daughter as much as we could, and research into what would help her, and the mom was doing the same thing, what would help her daughter. And she had dyscalculia, and I know we've had other students with dyscalculia that did fine with our program, but
again, wasn't a hands-off. The parent, the mom was with them.
But some of the things that she would do is take a break from what they were doing with us and do things with the manipulatives, even algebra. I know that Matthew C, in their algebra, they use manipulatives.
Right.
And
I think what she specifically used was called hands-on equations. And her daughter had trouble even understanding what 13 was 10 and 3. And when she was going through this hands-on equations, it finally like just clicked. The light bulb came on. And so they discovered that, because it was a short, like 20 lessons or something like that altogether. And they did that. And then when it came to equations, then it made a lot more sense. And she also had found this app for iPads.
It's from Paper. Paper is the name of it. It's an app, and what she was able to do with it is write on their iPad the equation that they were working through in our program, but each part of the equation they wrote in a different color. And
yeah.
The parts of the equation they were done with to get it out of the way so that
it
her
wasn't
daughter
distracting. Yeah.
Right.
So that was something that was very very useful that they found, and we now know that, and so we were able to give it to other parents that need that.
But her daughter had always struggled, had always hated math, because when you don't have any success with something, and everything's so much of a struggle, then of course you're not going to enjoy it. It's going to be something you dread and you hate, and when you have that dread and hate, with math, like anything, then it kind of puts up this wall in your brain, and your brain just is not able to efficiently absorb any information to do anything with it when it comes to the abstract algebra.
Exactly.
And so we just kind of supported her mom as much as possible, and her mom obviously knows her daughter better than anyone else, and better than we ever could. And and we had conversations on the phone, just kind of talking through things, and sometimes that's what is needed, and just the encouragement, like, hey, it's going to be okay, and yes, you can do this. And so that and they were able to come back and start with going through equations again, and using a calculator. She discovered, she's like, I don't know why I didn't do this before. It has saved our life. And I said, oh, absolutely. There are accommodations made in a regular classroom. Why can't we can make accommodations as we see fit, and that are not going to be a hindrance, but actually going to help move forward.
And I think that's an important key for parents to understand. That they can make these accommodations for their children, and depending on the special needs of the child, some are never going to get their multiplication table, so they can just rhyme them off.
I'm glad you said that, because there are so many parents are like, we tried this program, and they're still not getting it. And even my son, my oldest, he's been through every level of calculus now in college, but he struggled with his multiplication tables. And so it does not affect, it has to do with their long-term memory, and eventually, if they use them enough,
right,
they'll figure out a way to figure them out.
The important thing is if they understand what they're doing. If they can understand the 5 times 6 is 6 multiples of 5, or 5 multiples of 6, then if they understand that, it's not so important how fast they get to it. Some kids will never get to it fast. And if they understand it, letting them use the calculator to get to it will help them once they get to the algebra.
The concepts that are the important thing, and understanding those concepts are the most important. And it can be helpful to have those facts where you don't have to think about it. It can be very helpful, but it's not the end of the world if it takes longer. I remember when we had given a talk at a convention, and this woman, she was a psychologist, and she had pulled her child out for various reasons. And she was stressed because there was this expectation that the certain times you tests and all of that. And I asked how old he was, and he was, I think it was only 3rd grade. And so, and he was so anxious because of everything that he'd gone through in school with the timed tests, that if he knew it was a timed test, it was almost like his brain just shut down and said, I can't do it. It's too much for me. And so I said, look, it could take a couple years before, there's a fly going around here, before, he has that anxiety where it's at a level that he can, he's okay with it. And I said, if you're really stressed about it for you, I said, time him, but don't let him know that you're timing him, just for your sake.
Exactly.
What, how he's going. And I said, he's got time. It's not necessary to push him. All you're going to do is just create more anxiety for him. Whereas if you just let him kind of take a breather, it's more about the learning than it is the, this time to get it done fast as you can kind of thing. And, sometimes and she just hearing me say that was like, okay, that's what I thought, but I just need to hear something else say it.
Exactly. I mean, it's such simple advice, but the norm when we take the public school or private school mentality and put it in our house, we create a lot of anxiety for our kids that we don't necessarily need to be bringing into that whole situation. And we always talk about the process of deschooling kids when you take them out of public school, because a lot of families who have special needs kids, homeschooling wasn't their first choice. Right. They really thought the school can really help this child. I'm well equipped as a parent. And then they realized, no, they're really not. And now I'm teaching this child, and what do I do to help them get over the bullying, the anxiety, just the blockage? Like you said, there's a block because school has been so hard. And just taking that time away and realizing that it's about learning. It's not about school.
Right.
So,
and
definitely.
So, and then another student that we have, now I couldn't tell you exactly what his learning issues are, but he's on the spectrum. He's always struggled in math. In South Carolina, homeschoolers have to be tested by standardized tests every year. Okay. And so this particular student had never tested on grade level before in math, until he started with us. And then for 2 years, he's tested on grade level, and he's actually doing Algebra 2 right now. And awesome. He went from 53rd percentile to 77th percentile in the 2 years. And he's funny because we only show one question at a time, which is one thing that I was going to say for any parent that's doing any curriculum, and kids that have anxiety, or kids that I've heard from parents with kids with autism that was something that really helped their child, was only seeing that one question at a time.
And you can use any curriculum and do this yourself. You write the question on a piece of paper yourself from the book or whatever, and let them do that, and then write the next one. And so you can use what we've put into Unlock Math to adapt some of the things we've put into the curriculum you're using now.
Right, and then kids don't see this overwhelming sea of questions that they see as their enemy, and rather they see one question, and they can focus on that one question, and just work on solving that one problem at a time, and then before they know it, they're at the end of their questions, and then as a parent you can gauge, okay, you know what, they've had enough today. It's time to put this away. We'll come back to it, again later, because I've had so many students who I don't care, who they are, what their issues are. Sometimes they just need to let it gel overnight, or and then come back to it and start again. It sometimes it's just you hit a wall, and it's like, okay, we just have to step away from this. We'll come back to it. When the frustration or the tears or whatever it is that's going on, you're not going to get them any further in whatever the subject is if you just keep pushing them, and you're both going to end up frustrated and, upset with
and I think a lot of parents take that personally, and then they turn it into, my child's not obeying me. But really, it's because they're stuck, and you have to take that step back and take a look at what's going on and really see, is it frustration or is it disobedience? And a lot of time it's frustration. And yes, like you said, just take a break.
As parents, that's a hard thing to figure out, and control those emotional reactions that we have to, because our kids can push our buttons like nobody else.
And there's,
oh yeah.
You sit down at the beginning of the year and you've got your curriculum and you have your plan. This is how much we're going to do every day. This is how much we're going to do every week. This is how much we're going to have done by this time. And if you're not meeting your plan that way, you can start to put more pressure on your kids when maybe that's faster than they need to go.
And I'm guilty of it. I'm a plan girl. I like to have a plan.
Yep. Last week when I was talking with our guest, we were talking about how our husbands are a very good sounding board for us because we both were the big major planners, and they would often step in and say, have you really looked at this properly? And just to be honoring to their insight when they offer it.
It's very true. That's kind of how we work as well.
Definitely. So we've been kind of talking about, you shared some stories and you've kind of intermixed some accommodation ideas. Is there any other ones that you have to share with our audience? I don't see any questions up, but for those of you who are viewing, if you do have any questions you'd like to put into the feed, definitely type them in there and we'll be able to see them. But as we're waiting on that, is there anything else? I know you said writing, the questions one at a time on a piece of paper. It's definitely a good one.
Using graph paper, or even
some we will turn their lined paper so it's vertical, so keep the work organized in that sense, because it allows one of our customers' children found the graph paper too frustrating because it was too small. So just use lined paper. You could write the numbers bigger, but it still kept them lined up, which was what they what they needed anyway. So that's another little trick that helps.
If you did have multicolored pens, or I remember when I was in grade school that those were the coolest things. The pens could write 4 colors, but that's something like that, so that they can write the equations in different colors, each part of the equation. That can help them mentally keep things separate.
That's a great idea.
And using some kids will find algebra tiles helpful when it comes to solving algebra questions, because they're manipulating. They can see them. There's different colors. I believe Matthew uses algebra tiles quite a lot. You can go into YouTube and YouTube how to use algebra tiles. You can make some algebra tiles up. They're really just colored pieces of geometric figures, basically rectangles and squares and that kind of thing. And some kids will do really well with that. Some kids, every kid's going to move at a different pace, not pushing them too fast, but also not letting them get bored and pushing them hard enough. It's kind of a tricky thing, but I think, again, we know our kids better than anyone. So, like my second son, I always say I have to push him in. I know he can do it. He's not going to choose to do it on his own, so I have to tell him he has to do it and push him forward. And and he's okay with that. He's always been that way, and so that's been interesting.
Letting them move ahead on the concepts they get easily. I know some curriculum, you might have 100 questions on one concept. We try to give 10 on each daily lesson, with an explanation after every question of how we arrive at our answer. So we give them the solution so they can compare their work to ours. And after they get through those 10 and they're good, if they get the concept, they can move on. But if not, we give them 10 more questions as many times as necessary.
So in taking any curriculum, you know, if you can tell that they understand what they're doing, then don't make them do every question just because it's there. Let them move on.
Exactly.
You know, we don't want to kill and drill.
We don't want to frustrate them when they are ready to move through the material faster.
Right.
Right. But then when you have to slow down too. You can take that time to stop.
Absolutely. And that's that, you know, the timing is always going to be, you know, a tricky thing to figure out, I think, because there's so much, you know, textbooks, you know, there are lots of people who use textbooks and there's so much in a textbook. Well, there's no way you can get through everything. So, you know, picking out the important things and going from there.
One thing I would caution parents to do is not stress too much about how long it takes to get through the material for a child that does struggle. We've had students that take 2 years to get through pre-algebra, and the parents can be really stressing a bit. When we tell them the speed or how long it's taking is not what's important. Is the foundation they're laying solid? Exactly.
And grades 1 through 6, I mean, really and truly, they're all foundational. You know, I'm speaking about math right now, but it's all foundational stuff, and you basically learn the same thing every year. You just add on to it, and so it's not, you know, it can be, you know, he's in first grade and he doesn't know this, or, you know, it's. I kind of feel that, you know, there's too much emphasis on knowledge. Got to have knowledge, and knowledge is not the same as understanding, as we know. And so if they don't, I mean, math is so different. Math is a language all its own, but it's still, the understanding is so important. You can't have one without the other. You want the perfect balance of both, of course, but knowledge is not the most important thing in math. It's like, you know, you have the approach, well, this is how you do it, so now go and do it. And it means absolutely nothing. They're just following some process that makes no sense to them. And so anytime you can relate anything to them, to their interests, I find kids, you know, special needs kids, well, really any kid, that if you can relate anything to money, then it makes so much more sense to them. And you know, so in my essential math class that I taught, that was special education, we related to money all over the place because they understood money. And so, you know, if you find something that they understand, relate everything to that, whether it's sports or whether it's, you know, weather or bugs or whatever it is, math can always relate. If you can relate it to what they love or what they're interested in, then you're going to have their attention much, much easier. So
yeah, their brain is actually in, you know, there are studies that show you can focus better on something that you enjoy much longer than if you don't. We used we used Singapore math, which was the worst thing for my middle child because he could not understand what a prawn was. And so we get onto all these terms that they used in Singapore, and they had nothing to do with our culture here. And, you know, he's thinking off on the side of his head, what is a prawn? And I'm trying to ask him how to do a word problem. Finally, I changed everything to superheroes, and he was like instant with the answer instead of, you know, thinking about the terms I was using. So yeah. But, you know, yeah, you add money in and you've got a life skill on top of math skills.
Right.
So
that's a step further towards independence as well, which is, as you know, so
exactly.
important.
Yeah, definitely. We had one person say that, we make up word questions out of problems all the time. And again, that goes back to what you were talking about, you know, speaking the language of math in your home and making up word problems as you go along through the day. That is how you're going to build that understanding in your kids.
Yes, exactly.
It really is. It reminds me of the scripture where it says, you teach your kids when you rise up, when you lay down, in the middle of the day, you know, all the time. And, you know, that's teaching that's talking about teaching them the way of life that they should live. But you can incorporate that into so many different areas. You incorporate that into homeschooling. It's so many different subjects. You speak math to them. You talk about history. You talk about language and grammar, and so you just incorporate all of this into your daily life. And all of a sudden, homeschooling is your life, not just 2 hours at the table.
Yeah, I think that's when we first started homeschooling, because my oldest was diagnosed with high functioning autism. And I thought, okay, well, I just got to grin and bear and do this. But it came to a point where we loved it so much we could not part with it. And that's why. It's because it became it was incorporated into our life. It's our lifestyle now. Even though our kids, we have 2 graduated ones, we still sit around the table and share information at dinner, and it's just how we relate to one another. And it's a wonderful thing. Definitely.
Which is good socialization.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Are your kids socialized? Yes, they are. So yeah, well, we have about 8 minutes left. Amy also shared that you can find large square printable graph paper online. So yeah, definitely. But if you don't want to have to print it out, I love that idea about just turning the wider ruled paper the other way. I had never even thought about that. I used to make all the lines for my kids on the division, because you try to keep everything in the same line because they tend to migrate their numbers over, and that's great.
I have a story about graph paper. We have online chats with our math program, and our official hours are 9 to 4 Eastern time. But this one evening about 8:30, I had a student come on, and our phones were still on, so the chat comes to our phones. And she asked if I knew anywhere online to print out graph paper. And my immediate response was, it's going to be cheaper to just go to Staples. So he if you're going to need a pad of it, it's just cheaper than printing it.
Yeah.
So he messages me back, and she says, I live on an island in Alaska. We can't.
So probably not.
So I went online, found a place for her to print graph paper, and gave it to her. But that's
So it's not always cheaper to go to Staples.
The one expensive pad of paper.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's great. Well, I know that we've just got a few minutes left. I had one of the questions that we get from parents, and I know a lot of kids who struggle, have problems with sequencing. And I know, especially for kids who have fetal alcohol syndrome, this is especially true, is they can't sequence items. And math involves so much of sequencing and getting everything in the right order. Is there anything that you have to share with parents that are really struggling with kids who have that issue that they could do to help, even just with the basic idea of sequencing?
Well, I have to admit I have not had much experience with that. So I don't want to speak out of turn and say this will work when I don't have enough experience to speak to that. But I wonder if, when it comes to, something like solving equations or, just the steps through that type of thing, with order of operations even. I wonder if using colors would help. And, color coding the order of operations, it's parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. And using a different color for each one of those, and having that picture beside what, doing the work with. And so when they see yellow, they do that first. When they see green, they do that next. It's in order. Red, go from left to right, is multiplication, division. And I could see that having some benefits, just because it's a visual type of thing,
right,
into that.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, because I never even thought of that. But when talking to Carol Brown, Dr. Carol Brown, and we talked about equipping the mind with games, she was talking a lot about, talking about colors and associating them with other things and shapes. And so that would actually cause new pathways. So that's awesome. Something new for our parents to try. Definitely. I like that.
And then they can come back and tell you how it works.
Yeah, definitely. So if you do that, and if your child has problem with sequencing, I know it just used to drive me crazy because we would do it. I would have this little egg carton with the foster kids that I had, and we would put in one and here, one here, one here, and one here. And then we'd come back and it'd be one here, one over here. I mean, they had no concept of a sequence. And so you can't do much when they can't get beyond that, because there's so much that depends on being able to sequence things properly.
Right.
Right. So yeah. Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you for your time. This has been so enjoyable. Just being able to glean from your experience and what you've learned over the years in just teaching, homeschooling, and life in general. It's been great. So just thank you for your time, Matthew and Alesia. And I want people to know that they can visit your website. I'm going to put it up here on the screen.
Well, we really appreciate you having us. It was enjoyable for us as well. We love talking to others that have different experiences, and we can all learn from each other, as whether we're in the midst of homeschooling, whether somebody's finishing, whether someone's just coming in. I think the community of homeschoolers is such a unique and interesting thing, because we're with the internet, we can be miles apart and yet still connected, which is a really cool thing, and we can all learn from each other, which is really neat.
It is, and it's a growing community, and it's so nice that we can come together on things that we can do to build one another up and support one another, and just share our experiences, because we all don't have it down. and it's good that we can lean on each other. So, all right. Well, you can visit them at unlockmath.com and check out their math program, and definitely just thank you again for your time. And I just pray that you have many more successes with your curriculum as you continue to build it and to grow wherever God takes you. I know that you're resting on Him, so that's an exciting thing. So, and I just want to thank our audience for joining us. And next week is a little different. Normally, I tell you who I'm going to be talking to, but I have no idea, because I'm going to be in Russia, and I'm going to be at the Global Home Education Conference and grabbing people who are there to interview on the spot and put them on Facebook Live. So it'll probably be at a time you're not even awake. So definitely check out our page throughout the week next week. We'll be there from Sunday through the following Sunday. So definitely check that out, and always make sure to be visiting our website. We have a lot of new resources on spedhomeschool.com actually almost every day. So check those out, and if you're able, we would love for you to become a donor partner with us, and that information is also on our website. So until next week, we'll see you. Thanks for joining us for SPED Homeschool Conversations. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Bye-bye.